Hello, Internet, and welcome to my video diary. Today, I wanted to talk about my experience as a Hikikomori, or shut-in, or NEET, or whatever term you want to use. And if you don't know what those terms mean, NEET is an acronym that stands for Not in Education, Employment, or Training. It's basically a word for someone who stays at home, not really doing anything considered traditionally productive with their time. And Hikikomori is pretty much an Eastern term for the same thing. And shut-in, I guess, is just like an all-encompassing phrase for people that just don't leave their house. They're more or less 3 words for the same phenomenon. People that stay at home and don't do much. And that's a pretty good descriptor for myself. So I figured I'd talk about what that's like and my experiences living this way. So, firstly, I guess I should clarify what being a shut-in means for me. Basically, I don't leave the house at all by myself. I don't leave the house to go do things for fun. I live with my grandmother, and the only time I leave is when she wants to get food or groceries. And honestly, I don't think I would even leave for that, but, you know, she's older and she's had surgeries in the past, so she physically can't lift the groceries and needs someone to help her. So I go with her to lift groceries and to take trash off and things like that. But besides running errands for my grandma, I don't really leave the house. I can count on one hand the amount of times I've left the house on my own within the last few years. And maybe I'll talk about some of those experiences another time, but first I want to give a little backstory. And before I even begin, let me just clarify, let me just say right off the bat, this is not anyone else's fault but my own. I don't want this to be like interpreted as me saying, oh, you know, my childhood was rough, that's why I'm like this, I was doomed from the start or whatever. No. No. If I wanted to, I could force myself to leave the house tomorrow. This is all my own doing. I'm just giving this backstory as like some extra context for how this lifestyle of mine began. So, from the beginning of my life, my parents have been extremely strict when it came to me leaving the house. It basically was not allowed. And I don't just mean like as a little kid when you need someone to supervise you. I wasn't allowed to leave the house at all, even when I was a teenager. And there are 2 instances I can think of off the top of my head that exemplify what I mean. So, for context, growing up, I lived really close to a park. I was like 5 or 10 minutes away. And one day, I wanted to go for a walk there. And so I told my parents I was going for a walk. But I guess they were expecting me to just like walk back and forth on the sidewalk in front of our house, because when they looked outside and noticed I wasn't within eye shot, they immediately called my phone and were like telling me to get back immediately, and were asking where I was. And I think I was kind of pissed off at them for not letting me go out more. So I told them I was okay, but then I just like hung up and ignored them, and I didn't go home. I didn't say where I was, and they called the police on me. And I don't know, I think they said I ran away or something. And they had multiple people driving around my neighborhood searching for me just because I went for a little walk. And another time, there was this guy I met in high school. I kind of hesitate to call us friends because we didn't talk a whole lot. And that's not his fault. I was just like, I was like the socially inept autistic kid who never really knew what to say and didn't really talk to people. But he was probably the closest thing I had to a friend. He would let me sit with him at lunch, and I think we had 2 classes together, and normally he'd partner up with me, when we had to do partner work, which I'm sure doesn't sound like a big deal, but for me it was at the time because, like I said, I was the awkward, quiet kid no one wanted to partner up with. So when he was around, I didn't have that anxiety of like, oh no, everyone's going to pick their partners. I'm going to be the last one left and it's going to be embarrassing, I didn't have to worry about that when we had class together, which was nice. And there were even a couple times at lunch where, someone would pick on me or say something mean, and he'd tell them to knock it off pretty much. So, yeah, he was a cool guy. He was nice, and I wanted to get to know him more and, be actual friends. And one day he told me where he lived, and I was surprised because he literally lived, on the street over. There was my house, and then the street behind my house is where he was. So I was excited because we literally lived almost next to each other. So I thought it'd be pretty easy to visit. So eventually I asked my parents, and as you can probably guess, they weren't really into the idea. And not only that, but they made me tell them his full name, and they started looking up his Facebook profile and stuff, and then they found out he was black, and my parents are really racist, and that became a whole argument, and yeah, I never went to his house. And the next year, he dropped out of school, never came back, so that was the end of that. So yeah, it was not easy to leave my house when I lived with my parents. And, maybe that's not completely their fault. I'm sure on some level they thought they were protecting me and doing what was best to, keep me safe, but I don't know. Apparently when I was 2 or 3 years old, I was almost kidnapped, so maybe that's why they were so paranoid about keeping me close. But honestly, knowing how my parents are, looking back at that story, I'm not even sure that it happened because, I was too young to remember that event. So I kind of just wonder if it's a story they invented to make me even more scared than I already was to go outside. I don't really know. But anyways, yeah, I wasn't allowed to leave the house. Eventually they even started homeschooling me for a couple of years, and yeah, it was a whole thing. It is kind of weird for me to think back on that, because I feel like most of the time when you hear stories about parents who are too strict, their children kind of go the other way. Rather than listening to them, they rebel and try to break free and, go a little crazy. Normally kids don't just obey their weirdly strict parents. So sometimes I think back and I'm like, why didn't I do that? Why did I just go along with all of it and stay inside instead of trying to run away more often? And I think there might be a couple reasons for that. The first one being, like I said, I didn't do well in school socially. I got bullied a lot and was awkward and quiet, so I didn't really have the friend group, like the friend group in movies that, call you up and are like, hey, man, open your back window, let's sneak out, we're going partying. I didn't really have that. And also, obviously, if I did sneak away, I would have to come back home eventually. And I knew there would be hell to pay, and it'd be a horrible thing to deal with. And yeah. Also, I think if I'm being honest, I don't know. While I kind of resented it, I do think there was a part of me that kind of liked it in some ways. I didn't like my parents, but the moments where I wasn't dealing with them and was just shut away in my room, I think it was honestly kind of comforting. It felt nice, especially because, back then I would voice chat all the time on like Xbox Live playing Black Ops or Minecraft or something. And it felt like even though I was locked away in my room, I was kind of in my own little world where I could do what I want. I could choose to talk to people or not to talk to people at will. If I got overwhelmed or something, I could just take my headset off and go offline. Whereas IRL, you can't really just retreat from a conversation like that. So my room was like my own cozy little den in some ways. I hated school, had a lot of social anxiety and bullying. My parents were constantly screaming and yelling, so it was stressful being around them. But when I was in my room, headphones on, not hearing anything else, it was nice. And, it felt stable. And while the idea of leaving the house and going off on an adventure was something that seemed romantic to me, I knew if I actually ran away, if I actually did it, it probably wouldn't turn out so great. So I think I almost preferred daydreaming about how fun it would be from the safety of my nice, dark, air-conditioned room, rather than the actual reality of dealing with all that. Nowadays, of course, things have changed. Things are different. I don't live with my parents. I moved out when I was around 17 and started living with my grandparents. And my relationship with my room has also changed. I don't feel so fondly about it anymore. I actually feel, I don't know, I guess I feel kind of mixed about it, because if I truly hated it, I wouldn't stay in it for so long anymore. But I do sometimes feel this immense guilt over how much time I spend alone in my room. And I think the reason it's not as comforting for me nowadays is because when you're a kid, I feel like people, they almost give you a pass for being depressed and staying locked away. Because, everyone thinks it's just a phase and you're being dramatic. And I feel like they kind of view it as cute, almost. Like, oh, my little teenager going through their angsty phase, listening to My Chemical Romance or whatever. But when you aren't 16 anymore, and suddenly you're in your 20s, and you still just lay in bed all day, feeling like you're barely alive, having no desires to maintain a career or to build a relationship or to do anything. Suddenly it's not so cute. It's kind of pathetic, you know? People don't see you as an angsty little teen figuring themselves out. They see you as a loser. And I don't know, maybe they should. I don't know. So, anyway, what is the solution to this? If I feel guilty being cooped up in my room doing nothing, shouldn't I just go do something? And I think this is what I really struggle with the most, because I feel like I've already tried everything. Believe it or not, I actually had some jobs. My first one sucked. It was just like working at a seafood business, low pay, high amount of manual labor. It wasn't great, but a little later on, I got a job that was pretty damn incredible. It was a job in a field I was interested in. I made my own hours and I made decent money from it. Yet, despite all of that, I still felt horrible. Nothing really changed. Nothing really improved. I didn't feel happier during that time. And I did other things during that era as well. I had a long-term relationship that lasted like 2.5 years. I even started going to the gym. I went to some public events. And I still wanted to stop existing. So that's kind of why I find it so hard for me to have motivation to do anything, because I feel like I've done it all before. I put a lot of effort into living a normal life and working hard, and mentally at least, I got nothing in return. I made okay money, but I was still super depressed, still super anxious, still socially stunted. But I kept pushing and pushing anyway, trying to be happy. And spoiler alert, but it didn't work out, Eventually I just sort of burnt out. I slowly stopped working. I let my relationship fall apart. I paid for a gym membership for like 8 months or something that I didn't even use because I was too scared to go cancel it. Oh man. Basically, I touched grass. I lived a somewhat normal life, and I still wasn't happy. So what do I do? What does a person in that situation do? I feel like all the solutions I see people, giving towards being a shut-in or a NEET or whatever is just like, put yourself out there, meet people, talk to people, find your passions. And I feel like I did all of that, and none of it made me feel any sort of long-term fulfillment. And now I feel like I'm sort of just stuck in this weird limbo where it feels like there's not a right answer. It feels like there's 1,000 different trails and none of them lead to my destination. So where do I go? What's the point? And I guess that's sort of where I'm at in life. And I think something I'm gonna try to start doing, with my life as a whole, and also kind of documenting with this YouTube channel, is I think I'm gonna try to start embracing the Hiki lifestyle, because I've been living like this for a long time anyway, for years at this point. But like I said, I feel a lot of guilt over it. and I have theories as to like why I feel so guilty, but anyways, the whys don't matter right now. It just is what it is. It's how I often feel. I often feel super guilty over, being a shut-in. But I know other people who are in the exact same situation as me, and they don't feel this way. Like they enjoy it. They enjoy the comfort of their room, and I used to be that way when I was younger. So yeah, I kind of want that back. I kind of want to feel good again, even if it is, from the safety of my own room. So I think I'm gonna try to start embracing and romanticizing being a NEET and just chilling out and watching shows and movie all day or whatever. But yeah, I'm kind of going in circles at this point. Thanks for listening to me ramble. You are a trooper if you made it to the end of the video. I doubt anyone did, but yeah. Anyways, bye bye.